ready for takeoff. You are listening to DG the 30 something on KPCA LP, Petaluma, California, 103.3 FM. You can also listen to us live at kpca.fm, kpca at kpca.tv. Our address, if you're trying to find us, is P.O. Box 2806, Petaluma 94953. And I'm going to give people a couple minutes to join. It seems that all of our technology is working, which is incredible. So I am here. I'm so happy to be back in the studio again. And if you're listening on the radio, thank you very much. If you're viewing on Facebook Live, please feel free to ask questions during this time. I do have the live feed here, and I'm actually going to take a moment to share it over to my personal page to make sure that everyone can see it. I can multitask, however. So our show today, my show today is about the experience of a 30-something in our current economy and government. And, this is something I get asked about quite a bit because I am a 30-something. And before I get into a little bit about my story, because I do know that I have some new followers around, some housekeeping. We are on the radio. I do accept questions. I do offer the reminder that this is a nonpartisan, policy-based show. And I try to have conversations with people. So I'm always looking for those who want to engage and have a conversation. And so I'm going to give a little bit of a plug. Because my show is policy-based, I am always looking for new topic issues. And I think that today I'm actually going to cover a lot of the areas that I would like to address. And I also invite those who are experts in different areas to be on my show. I always love having guests. I think it's a great way to engage. And I will give a little plug that if you are running for a local office in Petaluma, I invite you to be on the show. And I will be sending some invites to those. And I will be calling out some certain people that I have already tried to engage, some local politicians, when I hit topic areas that I thought were most appropriate for them to be involved in. So today, my show is about being a millennial. Saying that word literally gives me the heebie-jeebies. I do not like using that word. I find it to be overused, watered down, and very much misunderstood. My first show was a response to Jared Huffman's forum on healthcare, and I do not want to sound redundant, but I am going to repeat some information that I think is really important before I start my commentary. So just in review, the age group I'm looking at is between 25 and 34, but for this show, I am, kind of broadening the commentary on what it is like to be a 30-something. And because that's my story, and that's a lot of my friends' stories, so it's what I can speak to and relate to best. But I did want to point out that those who are between the ages of 25 and 34, now it might be 26 and 35, because every year us millennials get older, there's actually 22 million of us in the United States. And there's a lot of issues that affect us directly. And if you missed my first show, I think it's important to give some context. So the reason I'm so passionate about this is that I've worked within government for most of my career. I got my start, I grew up in a household that was very philanthropic and service-minded. And I would say that I got my official start in government at age 14 as one of the founding members of the Petaluma Teen Council, as it was called at the time. And we were actually a formal advisory board for the city council in Petaluma. So I learned how to run public meetings. I learned about the Brown Act. I learned about Robert's Rules of Order. I learned about all that kind of stuff. and that really set the course for my career in the area. And just knowing about it at that age made such a big difference. So, now I'm 31. That's why I have the show, hence the name. And, it's been a long career. And I have a lot to say about it. So, again, I am happy to receive questions. I prefer to receive questions through my Facebook Live feed. If you do have an iPhone and have my phone number, you can also iMessage me. But beyond that, that's kind of the limitations now. But I do encourage people in the future, if you're listening over the radio or at kpca.fm, please get in contact with me and email me so that if you do have questions or topics you want to talk about in the future, we can talk about those. So I'm going to take off with that introduction. So I am going to start with healthcare. Again, I spent an entire radio show speaking about healthcare. So I do not want to completely hash this out again, but I think it's really important for those who missed that show on healthcare to get the information. So from a policy point of view, I did an ACA, an Affordable Care Act review, and some of the provisions that directly affected people that were within this demographic that I'm concerned about. And in my first show, I called it the forgotten demographic, because I think that it truly is the forgotten demographic. Some of the provisions that I mentioned, if they were to be repealed, and as it sits right now, we still are very unsure about what's about to occur. So I cannot comment on what's going to happen immediately, but I can comment on certain provisions that might be affected. So one of the ones I had mentioned is coverage on your parents' insurance through age 26. And this is a provision that was passed before the entire ACA reform was passed, but it was an incredibly important one because and I had stressed in my first radio show that when I was 26 years old, I was right out of my master's program, which I was told I had to do in order to be successful at my age. And I had this giant amount of student debt, which I'll get into later in the show. But at age 26, I was in survival mode, and I was just trying to figure out how to live. And actually, the law was enacted after I had already been kicked off my parents' insurance. So I was actually on private insurance for quite some time before that went back on. But it made a very big difference for me to actually have that coverage because, I was lucky enough to have parents that were on a group plan that was reasonable and was close to what I was paying individually. The other huge area I talked about was pre-existing conditions. And again, I don't want to reiterate all that. If you want to watch my old show, I really encourage you to do so. I really hash out the entire healthcare topic at length. But the fact that not being covered because you have a pre-existing condition is a huge issue. And, one of the pre-existing conditions I know I brought up was having an abnormal pap smear. And, most women have that through their life. And so it's really interesting that suddenly, pregnancy is the other one. And so that's my next point is maternity coverage and pregnancy. Through the ACA repeal, people would potentially lose their, their maternity and pregnancy coverage. And then the other thing is cost alone. The cost of healthcare has increased so much, and it increases every single year. And so cost alone is prohibitive to people within this demographic, like I said, between 25, 34, 35, however you want to look at it. The cost alone, if you do not have employer-paid medical, which I had employer-paid medical for the first time this year at age 31, but if you do not have that, and again, you're still paying a portion of that, it makes a big difference. So I'm going to move past healthcare. If people are interested in knowing more about this, this is my wheelhouse. My background's in public health, and I've worked a lot within healthcare, and I would like to say that I understand it pretty intimately. So if you're interested in knowing more, please contact me. But I do really want to get into these other topics that I have here. So my next is education. And my notes literally in front of me say, need I say more? I think that this demographic came from a very poor public education situation. And we were taught towards testing and we were not taught towards necessarily success in life and in career. And I was very lucky because I was given the opportunity by my parents to learn skills like starting to do my taxes at 15 when I had my first job, and understanding how all that worked, but most people don't have that. So we have built this education system of poor lower ed but forced higher ed. So perhaps we're teaching towards academia, so people and kids, whatever you want to, however you want to characterize it, go to college, but we're not actually teaching them to be successful. And I was telling the story not too long ago. I've always loved school. I've loved it. I'm one of those weird people. I love school. I loved going to school, but I struggled in higher education. I went to SRJC first, where I actually did pretty well, and then I moved on to UC Santa Barbara, where I struggled a lot. And in hindsight, the main reason I struggled was because it was all based on standardized testing. It wasn't, not standardized testing, but multiple choice testing. There was very little room for, I'm a systems thinker. I think about how to change systems. I'm not good at memorizing and regurgitating information. I'm a system thinker. I want to make change. And so while I had the dream of going to UC school my entire life, I actually struggled quite a bit when I was there because it wasn't structured properly for me. And I was very lucky because I don't have undergrad student loans, but I have grad student loans. And that is something I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life. And we all know, I don't have the statistics about it because I think it's too fresh of an idea to really comment on a factual basis, but we know that I shouldn't say we know, but my prediction is that the next crash, just like we had the housing crash prior, when I came out of school, I predict the next crash is going to be based on student loans and an inability to pay them and default and credit and being destroyed. I think that is going to be our next downfall. And it's so silly because this was created. I know me personally, the first year I started grad school was the year that the federal government decided they were going to issue all the grad school loans. I came in at interest rates that were 4 times what private banks and institutions were offering. And so that's debilitating. And as someone that's 22, 23 years old, you're being sold this idea that you have to get a higher education, and even higher education. You have to get your master's, you have to get your doctorate, otherwise you're not going to be successful. And so it's almost like signing your life away. And so I did it because I was told that's what was supposed to be done. And again, I'll get more into the general commentary towards the end, but this is a real issue. And the reason I bring up education, I probably should have brought it up first, because I think that this debt that people are carrying and that burden it very much impacts people's lives and their decisions. So I'm going to move on to housing. This has been a really hot button issue in general where I live in this area, in the North Bay, the Greater Bay Area. It's becoming close to impossible to live here for me especially. And it's so interesting because, it's just, and don't mind me, I'm trying to make sure that if people have questions that I see them. So if I'm looking down, that's why. But so back on the housing issue, I actually started looking up some statistics about housing because this is not something that I'm super familiar with. And what I found is that the National Association of Realtors uses some data from different banks and loans, lenders every year to kind of assess the affordability of housing for certain demographics. And what I found is that housing is less affordable for millennials, and what they measure is median home price versus median family income. And some of the predictions that were given for this reasoning was the increase in down payments and tighter guidelines for secure mortgages after the last crash. we know that it's much harder to secure a mortgage based on credit standards. And then, of course, there's lifestyle changes. So I kind of want to comment on this in general because, of course, there's lifestyle changes, but I think that those are indicative of the current financial status that most millennials are in. So increased credit standards after the crash. So when we talk about student loans, they don't actually affect your credit until you default. But I'm presuming, and I didn't pull the statistic, I wish I did, about how many people default on their student loans. So defaulting is basically just not making a payment. And again, the lenders are pretty good about making up payment plans and doing different things to accommodate different needs. But I feel that when you're in survival mode and you're trying to get a job and you're trying to pay for your health care and you're trying to do all these things, you're not quite thinking about your credit score. And again, this comes to the poor lower education that we had. No one's talking about credit scores or finances or budgets when you're in elementary school or high school. And this is one of the main reasons I have tried to start and have started social. I mean, I focus on social entrepreneurship, but starting entrepreneurship programs with high school students, and it's not necessarily like everyone's going to start a company, but it teaches them how to budget, how to project, how to do how to think about doing taxes, how to think about investments, and it really reshapes how people think, especially young people. It really reshapes how teenagers think about money and how to manage their money and how to manage their debt and how to deal with these things. Because, I'm the first person to say, like, the thought of owning a house is not even within my thought process at this point. Because, and there's, again, everyone's story is different, but, and, everyone says, well, it's your mortgage should be cheaper than renting, this, that, but it doesn't get to the core issue. How do I show up and get pre-qualified for a loan? How do I come up with a down payment? Because, perhaps people can make a 3 or 4% down payment, but you'd have to have impeccable credit and a lot of capital to show that up. And that's just not the reality. I mean, for most people my age, like, that's just not the reality. Like, I know I don't even have a 5% down payment, let alone a 20% down payment, which this article I was reading from the National Association of Realtors was basically saying that's the expectation unless you have, like, a really high income and a perfect credit score and all these other things. Like, you're really expected to make between a 10 and 20% down payment. I mean, that's just totally unrealistic. I mean, shoot, in this area, I think, the average, I don't even know, the average house, what is it, $625,000, $700,000 in Petaluma? That's a pretty substantial amount of money that you're supposed to just come up with, and it's more than my student loans, the amount of money I'm expected to come up with. And so, it makes a big difference. And again, I think most people have seen, if not, I don't want to make generalizations, but a study was released, which was not shocking to me, that in no state in the United States can someone on minimum wage rent a 2-bedroom apartment. Well, shoot, in California, in the North Bay, I don't think anyone on minimum wage can afford any apartment by themselves or even with their family. Because there's this huge disconnect between a living wage and a paid wage. And again, I do not endorse one policy decision versus the other, raising the minimum wage versus not. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm just here to present the facts so people can start thinking about these issues. And that really brings me into the next area, which is career and job creation. So, there's huge barriers to employment. And I say that hesitantly because we have all this media telling us that the unemployment rates are down, yada, yada, which is true. That's all very factual. The unemployment rates are at an all-time high. The issue is that there's been an increase in low-paying jobs. And again, I have to speak for myself living in Northern California. You cannot live off a low-paying job. You cannot live off even double the minimum wage in this area. on your own. And so, that's a huge issue, is that, yes, we've created a bunch of low-paying jobs. And so you have a lot of college-educated students who, again, were told they had to do that in order to be successful. And, they're doing low-paying jobs, and they're doing what they can to get by. And one of the other major barriers I noted, especially as a woman, is that this economy is not mom or family friendly. So you have to make sacrifices. And this is why I would argue we've seen delays in marriage and creating families amongst the millennial generation, because in my mind, just personally, in my mind, it's not even financially feasible for me. Like, I can barely take care of myself. Why would I want to get married and have a child? And then the expectation is that childcare likely costs more than I would make working. And we're in this huge predicament. And again, I can't speak to every state, but this is a huge issue in California, that childcare literally costs more than mothers, potentially could make, or fathers. I know they're single fathers, but again, I have to speak to kind of, the majority experience. But, that's a huge issue, is that people can't even get childcare in order to work. Even if they wanted to work, they couldn't work because they can't get childcare that's not going to cost, a ridiculous amount of money. And so we've created this very unfriendly environment for families, not just women, but families in general. And so, that's a big issue. And again, I already talked about the living wage versus actual wage. The living wage, there's a couple organizations that calculate that based on where you are. If you just Google, living wage, you can usually find out where in your area, where that lands, to see, kind of where you fall. And I was just having this conversation just right before I walked into this studio, because, and I want to say this without offending people, but I always offend people. So we are in a market where we have to hail to the baby boomer. That's who is hiring us as millennials. That is who is making the calls. And the funniest paradigm for me about that is that they created this issue. And there's very few boomers that will admit that. They will not admit that they actually created this beast. Many boomers, and again, I don't have all the statistics in front of me. You can look them up. They're there. I know they're there. I've seen them. Many boomers live beyond their means. And again, they told us that we had to get a college education and we had to get a grad school education. We had to do all these things. Otherwise, we weren't going to be successful. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that their intentions were poor in that process. But where the failure was that we didn't actually get the life skills to live and to work. Somehow, college was the answer. And in my experience, college was not the answer. And I was always someone that wanted to go to college. So I don't say that because I wouldn't have done it, because I would have always done it and I would do it again. But we were handed this economy. And don't get me wrong, I think that millennials at some point have to take responsibility and they have to make change. And they have to say, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not entitled to anything, because there are those people that are entitled. But at the same time, it's so interesting. So I'm a business owner. I've had one for 5 years. A lot of what I do is actually train other people how to do their job, especially within the nonprofit and government realm. And I just always constantly run into this issue that millennials are painted as lazy and entitled, and, well, you haven't been doing this very long, so you don't know what you're doing. And part of me gets it. Part of me gets it, because I have a really hard time, sometimes finding good help and training people. But the other side of it is I always want to look at people, and I can't ever do it when I'm at work, is you did this. You created this. You created this beast and this problem, and we were left with it. And, I wrote a blog quite some time ago, but I think it's very applicable still. I think it was called, I can't remember the number. It was like 8 things that millennials wish their bosses would learn. And it was basically a rebuttal to the constant commentary that millennials are lazy and all this kind of stuff. Like, we drive the workplace and the market. So there's 2 choices. You either help us learn and you learn to communicate with us, or you give it up. And I don't want to, I don't want to rant and rave about that, but I think it's a really important commentary. Like, it wasn't, again, I was very lucky because I grew up in an environment where I sat down, my mom forced me to sit down and do my taxes when I had my first job when I was 15 years old. I had to do it myself. I had to figure it out. And that was the way it was. But I know, and I've worked with teenagers over the course of my life, and I know that that's not the information they're getting. They're literally being told that they have to go to college, and that's the answer. And perhaps it's an important cog point, but it's not the answer. It is not the answer. And I stress that so much. And we know that actually, and I forgot, I meant to start with this statistic, but millennials are actually making 20% less than boomers at the same life place and for doing the same job. And that's information that was, it was based on data from the Federal Reserve that was calculated by the Young Invincibles. You cannot argue that point. We now are in this situation where we have a ridiculous amount of student debt. We were told we had to go to college. We weren't given the life skills or the work skills to do a lot of anything. And now we're forced to make 20% less than our parents. Like, that is a significant issue. So everything else aside, that's an issue. And again, like, I would never be where I was if it wasn't for the fact that, I did grow up in a household where I was forced to kind of do things. And for those who don't know, sorry, hold on. I'm trying to get back to, okay, there we are. For some reason, it keeps trying to show the video, and I don't want to show the video here because I don't want any feedback when I'm doing the video. So where was I with that? So one of the main reasons for people that don't know, and I think most people here that are watching know, but for those who don't know, I was forced when I came out of my master's program in 2011 to start my own company. And again, it was a blessing in disguise. I was trying to find a job, and I was up against, and in public health, my master's is in public health. And I was up against an economic downturn and people that were, 20 years my seniors. Of course they had more experience than I did. I couldn't compete with those people. I couldn't compete with someone, that's been working in the field for 20 years more than I have. Like, 10, 20 years, I couldn't do it. And, the government wasn't friendly to young ideas and new ideas. And again, I think I brought this up during my last radio show, and I still haven't published the blog, but I wrote a blog. It's not that millennials don't want government, it's that government doesn't want millennials. And I think that that's a really prominent idea about the lack of change. And so that's actually a perfect segue into my next topic. So I didn't actually think that I was going to be commenting on this, but I got some information from a trusted source who told me that I should watch the release of the new Democratic platform before my radio show. Again, I reiterate that this is a nonpartisan show. I have been an unaffiliated voter since I was 18. I was one of those kids that actually sat down and read the individual platforms of all the parties that I knew about. So Republican, Democrat, Green, American Independent. I went through Libertarian. I went through, all the parties at that point that I knew, and none of them worked for me. So I registered unaffiliated, and since then, since I was 18, I have been a registered unaffiliated voter this entire time. And so and that's why I'm so passionate about this being a nonpartisan conversation about issues. So, but I do think that commenting on this video is so important, and I'm trying to. I will try not to laugh during this commentary, but it's actually, quite frankly, laughable. So, just to start off, before I get into that, in the last election, only a fifth of ages 18 to 34 voted. That's pretty awful. That's pretty awful. And this is where I hold my generation responsible. Because given all the information that I just said, if you're unwilling to be a part of the process, then you can't get mad at the process. And I will say this over and over and over again. I remember I actually posted it during the last election, where I said, if you are actually unwilling to vote or be involved, you will never be heard. And I'm sorry. That's just true. And I know that that's really how I feel. And I know that people, I get it. I get that people are jaded. I get that, you know, most people believe that their voice doesn't matter and nothing's ever going to change. And I get that. But it's actually your civic duty as an American to vote and to have a say. And in a lot of other countries, you don't have that. So I stress this so much. And I am not saying that every person has to be an expert on every legislation and every law, but you need to care. God, you need to care about something. I mean, seriously. So, again, I want to start ranting and raving about that because I get in some pretty heated debates because a lot of people do think that if you're uninformed, you shouldn't vote. But compared to what? Compared to what? Look at our current situation. And again, I'm not going to explicitly comment on that, but look at our current situation. Talk about being uninformed. So, again, I was going to actually play excerpts from the release of the new Democratic platform, but to be entirely honest with you, I got 20 minutes in and I couldn't watch it anymore. I felt getting 20 minutes in was as far as I could literally get through the speech. And I think it was like an hour long. And so once I hit that point, I actually just started skipping ahead to hear what each speaker said. But it was so predictable what they were going to say that I couldn't. So I did compile some notes that I do want to comment, and it's so funny because my first note, it says new Democratic platform, WTF ? So many big words, still don't know at all what you're saying. And I feel like that was, a really genuine interpretation of the situation because, again, like, I'm really into this stuff. Like, I read legislation. I do this kind of stuff. And I was sitting there the entire time. And we're talking, this is within the first 5 minutes of this speech, that I was just, is this a joke? And again, some of this is a little out of order, but I do, again, you can read it, but I'm not going to endorse policy decisions or directions. I'm only strictly going to comment on the messaging that they provided because I think that's super important. So they immediately started with, I think it was Schumer. I didn't write down everyone who said everything. I didn't think it was relevant. That was how impactful it was. They started with Republican bashing, which, just why? How is that progressive? How is that different? I don't understand. Like, you're basically telling me within the first 5 to 10 minutes of your talk that you're unwilling to have a conversation because you're completely bashing the current administration. And don't get me wrong, I have plenty of things to say about the current administration. But when you're talking about launching your new platform, why would you lead with that? It's like how I do job interviews or when I'm hiring a consultant. And I always did this with my business, and I think it's why I've been so successful. I never bashed the competition. I said why I was better. I was immediately deterred as soon as they started talking about what the Republicans did and how they won and how they yada yada yada. You lost me within the first 5 minutes. But I forced myself to stay for 20. Some words that I was really, I actually made a list of words that bug the crap out of me. Just bug me. So their whole platform is a better deal. So you have to hear that. I think it's like a drinking game, right? Like every time they say a better deal, you can take a shot. I didn't count how many times they said that during the speech because I couldn't stomach watching the entire thing. But they're still leading with gimmicks. Don't you get that the millennial population, who is your potential largest voting base, does not want gimmicks? This is how you lost the last election. Like, who is running your marketing and PR? Jeez, I would like to meet this person so I could just shake them. I mean, and so some of the words I wrote down, hope. I hate that word. I hate the word hope. I am so tired of hearing it. I will never use it in any of my messaging. Don't get me wrong. I might say it in passing. I might say it casually. I hate the word hope, and I wish anyone that's in PR will stop using the word hope. It's empty. It's an empty word. It's basically saying, oh, well, we hope this will happen, but we're not going to do anything about it. Middle class, stressed over and over and over. And this is where the Republican bashing came in, because they said that the Republicans were disconnected. They sold the middle class, were disconnected from the middle class. However, the Democrats are no more connected to the middle class. Look at how they were all standing there. My main question was, and again, I'm someone that's in PR and marketing and branding, why the heck were they all wearing blue? Did they not have their own personalities? Can they not dress themselves? Why were they all wearing different shades of blue? Maybe I'm weird. Maybe that's something that's weird to me, but I found it to be so sterile. I didn't understand it. And they're all just standing there with their hands crossed, and it's very strange. Opportunity. I actually love the word opportunity when used properly, but I feel like in politics and government, it's never used properly. Because selling this idea of an opportunity has no regard for how hard life is for many people. And again, this is a huge disconnect. And again, even if I'm going to speak to my own generation, this is a huge disconnect. Oh, well, you have the opportunity to do anything. Yeah, I've been told that my entire life, and where did that get me? Nowhere. And I actually, I wrote in a blog not too long ago that when I started a youth program, one of the things I said, and I got a lot of pushback, is I literally said, the world does not care about you. And what you need to realize when you graduate high school is that no one's going to be there for you. And that's very brash, and that's very, very, again, maybe it sounds mean, maybe it sounds brash, but we've spent too much time telling kids that, oh, you have all this opportunity. No matter what you do, it's going to be fine. It's going to be great. All these people are going to help you. No one helps you. No one helps you. And without addressing the individual barriers to entry and working your ass off, like no one's going to be there to handhold you. And I want young people to understand that. There are those people that are good, everything's going to be handed to them. That's not who I work with directly. But for everyone, and even those kids where everything's handed to them, they're going to hit a wall at some point where they don't actually have the work ethic or the job skills or the life skills to do something. You have to work at it. You have to be a constant learner. And this whole idea that anyone can do anything, it needs to be done. It needs to be done. It's not realistic. It's not real. I hate hearing that. And again, I am someone that's super positive and tell people, like, yes, you can always make the change. You can always do new things, but it's a personal decision to put that work in. We need to stop telling our young kids, like, you can do whatever you want. You can do whatever you want if you have the skills, and you're going to constantly learn, and you're going to constantly work. This is one of my hugest pet peeves, and I know it pisses people off, but I just don't care. I work with youth for half my life, and this is something that's so important to me, and I will never look at a youth and say, you can do whatever you want. I will say, it's going to be, you can definitely accomplish your goals, but it's going to take X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to help you get there. And that's the failure in our education system and all of our programs, especially with disenfranchised populations and minority populations. We're too busy selling that same rhetoric that you can do whatever you want, and without giving them the tools to accomplish what they want to do. I remember when I started a teen program, I asked one of the girls, what do you want to do? She said, well, I want to be an MFT. And I was like, that's fabulous. Do you know what it takes to be an MFT? And she looked at me and she said, no. And I said, well, you should probably look into that, because I fully support you going to school and becoming an MFT. But if you don't know what it takes to be an MFT, then what direction do you have? And that's, that's really important. I'm in my last 15 minutes. I'm going to power through this a little bit. So I do want to comment on, I think they have 3 pillars that they are going to change. So, so they're going to increase pay. They're going to decrease household expenses, and they're going to give tools for the workers of the 21st century. That was one of my other words that I put on there. Giant corporations in 21st century. Okay, we get it. Woo! Lights, sirens. And then the individual speakers proceeded to talk about how they were going to accomplish increasing pay, decreasing expenses, and giving the tools to workers. So, increasing pay, in short, I get it. Okay, you're going to raise the minimum wage. Not really going to comment on that, because I could probably do a whole show on that. Decrease household expenses. This was an interesting one to me, because the points they brought up was increasing sick leave and decreasing prescription drug prices and breaking up monopolies. And I was so confused. I mean, and I'm not saying I support or not support those issues, but how, I didn't get it. None of that made any sense to me. How is breaking up monopolies going to immediately affect my household income? And decreasing prescription drugs? Like, I don't rely on any prescription drugs. And again, there are people that do, and that's really important. And I'm not saying that, we shouldn't deal with the pharmaceutical companies and do that. But strictly from a messaging standpoint, you're starting to lose people. And then they went on to tools for 21st century workers, and they literally sat in the manufacturing space because they were immediately responding to the Republican campaign. And again, you lost me. And I would love to know how many people that are in the manufacturing space or that are affected by chronic illness or have children that are affected by chronic illness that were watching that, because again, when you talk about the millennial demographic, you are not appealing to us in general. I'm making a maximalization again, and I'm not being insensitive to people that are affected by these different areas. And again, I live in Northern California. I have one point of view. I have worked with populations all over the world, but all of this meant nothing to me. And not that it meant nothing to me personally, because I never listen or watch these things in a personal context. I am listening to them in the context of how other people are hearing it. And then there was a claim that young people are leaving areas because of lack of job skills. And in my notes, all I say, is that true? Like, is that factual? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. They made that claim that young people are leaving areas because of the lack of job skills. And I guess my experience would be the other things I talked about, like cost of living, wages, and perhaps I guess the argument could be that people are making lower wages because they don't have the job skills. But I don't find that to be the case here. It may be the case elsewhere, but people have the job skills. You know, I live in a very highly educated place. So again, I have a certain perspective, and I am admitting that. I'm not speaking for the entire country, but I would like to know, I would like them to fact check that and tell me where they got the information. And it's so funny. One of the other constant commentaries, they said that, let me tell you why this is important. You lost me again. You lost me again. I feel like that sentence in itself is so demeaning to everyone. Like, let me in my blue clothing as a politician tell you why it's important. Okay, Democratic Party, you're showing how disconnected you are from the American people again. My Lord. Okay. So anyway, so like I said, 20 minutes in, I could not listen anymore. I felt like I was listening to a stage again of boomers making broken promises. There was really no substantial or new information that was provided. There was nothing that caught my eye, and I feel like they've backpedaled. I think that they've gone backwards from where they were during the last presidential election, where I feel like they had a little bit more substantial platform than a better deal. Anyway, so in closing, I'm going to close out. Like I said, I was very disappointed. I'm not a Democrat, so I will not comment or endorse anything one way or the other. But I was so disappointed by that showing. I can't even say I had hope for it, because I just kind of knew how it was going to go down. But I was very disappointed. And I guess I know. I remember this, and where did I put it? Oh, I put it in my closing. So the last speaker, I think his name was Joaquim. He was from Brooklyn, and he got up there, and he basically said that zip code doesn't matter, and we all experience the same problems. And that right there, and I'm glad I skipped and caught that part of it. Because like I said, after 20 minutes, I just skipped through the different speakers. When I got to that point, I was shocked. I was shocked to think that he was going to compare Brooklyn to Berrydale and say that zip code doesn't matter. Because that goes against everything we know about public health data. Zip code very much matters. And claiming that every zip code in the United States is experiencing the same issues only illustrates how far the party is from reality. I was actually offended by that. I was offended that he said it, because it was so far from reality. And again, I can't blame him individually, because I'm sure some PR person wrote that for him, but that was so disconnected from reality that it tanked the whole thing, as if it wasn't bad enough as it was. Like, don't you get where millennials are? Don't you get it? We don't buy this. I'm not going to swear. We don't buy this stuff. We do not buy it. And this is why young people don't vote, is because we have to watch people get on stage and tell us how they're going to give us a better deal and tell us why it's important. We know why it's important. We're living this life. And we have, I put down 3 notes. And again, it's not across the board, but I think in general, when you look at statistics about the millennial generation and what we're looking for a strive towards change, diversity, and worldliness. We have a higher access to information than any generation prior. And when I say worldliness, I think it's relative to each person. Worldliness to one person might be traveling to Africa like I did. Worldliness to another person might be following people on Facebook that are in another country. Worldliness to another person might be leaving the state. But all that's important, because you learn through those processes when you get out of your bubble. And don't get me wrong, not everyone's going to have their bubble. But I just felt like, and again, I never thought I was going to be commenting on this, but it was so important to comment on, because I think it indicates across the board the disconnect that government has with young people still. Still, there's this huge disconnect that, unless you are in this situation, and I guess let me just give a personal commentary and not speak on behalf of my generation, but an increase in minimum wage is only going to hurt me as a business owner. And again, I'm not endorsing it or not endorsing it. A decrease in household expenses, well, prescription drugs and sick leave, again, doesn't affect me. And tools for workers, they're talking about giving incentives for companies that are willing to train workers in a certain skill set. But I already train workers, and I probably wouldn't qualify for that tax credit because I'm not teaching them in technology manufacturing. So again, there's just this huge disconnect, and I don't know if it's a communication issue or it's actually a platform issue, but I don't want your better deal. I don't want it, and something needs to happen to figure that out because, again, you know, like I said, I'm striving towards change, diversity, and worldliness, and what I saw in that speech didn't speak to any of those issues. And so I hope that people realize, I'm going to check my notifications one more time just to make sure that no one has any questions, which I don't think anyone does. If you have any questions, speak now. Forever hold your peace. We only got 5 minutes. I will give the plug again. So I know that perhaps you didn't realize, but my theme is always in the public health spectrum. And I developed all these categories based on the social determinants of health. It's kind of how I think about life and my own personal business in general. And so just to stress, the social determinant of health are access to healthcare, education, economic stability, environment, built environment, and your social network. And those are all super important to success. And again, I think one of the biggest disconnects with the current administration or the current politicians in general across the board, again, not speaking to a certain party or the other, is that they have such a misunderstanding of where the young people are with their business development. And I've stressed it over and over. I run a social enterprise. Getting social enterprises funded are close to impossible unless you're within certain fields in the state of California. And unfortunately, our current administration is trying to defund those. So I'm also a leadership council member of the National Small Business Association. And, you know, small businesses, and again, I will give the Democratic Party a little bit of credit. They did say that they were going to try to give incentives for small companies, but again, only for training workers in certain skill sets, which doesn't help a lot of small businesses who drive this company. I think country. I think over 50% of the employees are hired in small businesses. So in this country, so I don't feel like a lot of movement is happening in any positive direction from either camp. And again, like I would love to hear from people that see a huge benefit from what's going on or had an amazing reaction to this a better deal that we're about to get. But I still see nothing. You know, I still see nothing. And again, I should end by saying that I'm not saying that because I'm apathetic and I'm not going to continue to be involved, because I am going to continue to be involved. I think it's really important to, and it's part of my duty. And that's why I'm here today, is because I'm advocating for that voice and that age group. And, you know, I could sit here and hash out policy by policy. And, you know, I'm happy to do so if people have an interest in that. But so far, I feel like the overarching commentary has been so prominent that's the most important thing for me. So, again, I actually didn't get any questions during this feed, but if you have them, I'm more than happy to answer them. I am about to close out here because we're almost in the 8 o'clock hour, and I will be back next month, the second Tuesday of every month. Again, I am always looking for contributors. I'm looking for people that are experts in certain issues, especially within the issues that I highlighted today, because I would like to bring them in and talk to them. So please, again, reach out to me. if you would like to be covered. And I will reiterate that if you are running for office in the city of Petaluma, please give me a shout out, because I would like to have you on my show. So again, you are listening to DG the 30-something on KPCA-LP, Petaluma, California, 103.3 FM, and online at kpca.fm. If you're trying to reach us, you can email us at kpca@pca.tv, and you can send us mail, snail mail if you really feel so inclined, at P.O. Box 2806, Petaluma 94953. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'll talk to you soon.